Hi, hello everyone who's logging on. We're glad to have you. We're going to give people just a couple minutes before we get started, and our ask is that you throw in the chat where you are zooming from. I always want to say where you're dialing in from, which shows a
Yeah, like we're
generation
gonna do like a
generations
dial-up.
come in. Yeah. But I'm in Park City, Utah. Megan, where are you?
I'm in Edmonds, which is just outside of Seattle, Washington.
Washington. So we'd love, as folks join, we'd love to hear where you are and your name so we can know who's on the call. Again, the Zoom. So I don't say dialing in again there, Megan. Um, I was just sharing. Hey, Lauren. I was just sharing with Megan before the call that we have our first snow. I'm in Park City and we always get snow before Halloween, and this year we did again. So we're getting the snow tires on and we're getting ready for it getting pretty real here for winter pretty quickly.
We've got rain because that's what
Got
we have
rain.
for like 40% of the time. Oh, Hagen, good to see you, girl.
Hey,
Sorry, I'm like
Sarah.
seeing people dial in, I know.
I
Hi.
know, I love it. I love it. Yeah, no snow. Yeah, Seattle and snow are not great, having lived there for most of
Mm,
my life. It's just not a great combo.
agreed. Not the
Some
city's not built for it.
No, city's not
Mm.
built for it. The drivers aren't used to it. Um, I was thinking I never had snow tires, I don't think, in Seattle. And I have them here, but um they sure make a difference. So San Diego, this Danielle's the bragger of the group, which honestly I would do exactly the same thing if I was in San Diego right now. Um 75 and sunny, just always. I like the way she says just always 75 and sunny.
I'm a California native, so I'm a transplant up here and I get it and I miss it.
Where in California? Remind me.
I was from the Bay Area, San Jose.
St. George, Utah is beautiful
Oh,
this time of year.
gorgeous.
It's a place we often escape to from the northern part of Utah for sure. Well, as people continue to join, which they will, please, add who you are and where you're from. We'd love to hear from you. And I think we'll get started and just dig in. Super excited to have this conversation and to have another missing chapter session. So missing chapters is our webinar series here at Nava where we talk about stories from HR leaders that maybe weren't in the handbook, that weren't in the guidebook or the education you were given before you got into HR. Maybe it's not in your company handbook, but they're things that folks in human resources definitely need to deal with. And so we've had a number of really great conversations, and I'm looking forward to this one today. Really glad to have you all joining us. My name is Amy Frampton. I'm the CMO here at Nava Benefits. Been here for about 9 months now. It's been the fastest and the slowest. Feels like I've been here forever. I feel so at home, but at the same time, it just has gone like that. And I'm sure everyone on this call um, can understand that. So, Megan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Ooh, sure. Hi, my name is Megan. I'm the Chief People Officer at a company called Entra that does legal AI tech for private markets. And I have been with the company for about 2 years. This is my third CHRO gig and have spent my entire career in the world of human resources and people. And excited to be here and having this convo with you, Amy.
We're thrilled to have you. And Megan and I have worked together before, and she's just so good. I know you're all going to love hearing from her, but specifically on this topic, so passionate. And so let's dive in and
Do it.
start. This is going to be a fun one. Before I start asking questions, which is one of the fun parts of my job, I would just encourage everyone, don't be shy with the chat. Put in any thoughts, questions as we go along. We will answer those live, and look forward to having a real conversation with you. So let's just kind of step back and kick things off with talking about how trends impact HR and the larger company because it's not a static field, right? So
Right.
how do those trends in the big picture affect HR?
So I would actually maybe take it one step back further than that, which is like, what
Great.
is the point? Like
Yeah.
what, like why do we
Like,
have people teams, HR teams? As anyone who's been on a team with me knows, for those of you out there, I prefer the term people because I think human resources makes it feel like people are relegated to being a resource similar to, the
mhm.
tools in my
A
shed.
widget. Yep. Yep.
So, but when I think about kind of, why organizations have people teams, right? At its core, it is so that we can align people with the mission, vision, values of the organization and ensure that they are working in really productive ways and helping to deliver, whatever it is that that organization is on the earth to achieve. So, when you really kind of like back it in at that level, we are trying to have people who are engaged. We're trying to have people who are productive. And there's no silver bullet. There's no single answer. There's no like, gap book of like how you do the things. It is a lot of trial and error. And so I think a lot of people who are in this space are constantly trying to be innovative and be thinking about how could I do things differently? Like, what are ways that I could ensure that my folks are feeling really engaged? What are ways that I can ensure that people are aligned and, doing the work that is going to be most beneficial to the organization, et cetera? So there's a lot of options. There's a lot of things that you could be choosing from. And so we often are looking to others and saying like, hey, what are you doing? What's working? I try and network a lot and am a part of several different groups of like-minded individuals, mainly so that I can be hearing what other people are doing and also sharing with them stuff that I'm doing, because that's pretty much our lifeblood in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, I think in its essence, like every best practice starts as a trend. And
Mm.
so we're kind of all on the lookout for, what are those trends and what could potentially be something that helps us be a employer of choice, help ensure that we are keeping people in the organization that we want to, and having those folks really contribute in meaningful ways. And so I think at its core, a part of what we are supposed to be doing as people teams is to help identify what are those trends that are out there, and what are the ones that we would want to kind of bring into the organization and eventually probably become a best practice for us. So I mean, I think that's like trends don't just impact the people team. They really, in a lot of ways, like are the lifeblood for the people team.
Mhm.
But there's a cautionary tale there also,
Yeah.
if you will,
Yeah. And I love
which is, I
every best
think,
practice was once a trend, right? Like they have to start
right,
somewhere. Yeah.
right, totally. Um, and I think a part of that is identifying like not every best practice is best for you. And so how do you create appropriate filters, or how are there ways for you to be digesting the things that you could be going after, should be going after? What are the trends to pay attention to on some level, and how do you really identify what's best for your org versus just all the myriad of
Yeah.
options that are out there?
Just take them all on at once,
Yeah.
right? All at the same
Yeah,
time. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
What are some
Right.
of the most common trends you're seeing or have kind of seen over the years? And are there things that kind of come and go, or have you seen as they become those best practices, what have you seen as the most common?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you gave me that as a prep question, and I was like, oh, what are some of the things that I've seen? Um, I was thinking about that a little bit, and if I look back over my career, I started as an HR professional in the Silicon Valley in like 2000, right? So, for anybody who's like studied history, because that's what it is at this point, right? Like that was like dot-com craziness. And the Silicon Valley was like the eye of the storm. What was really interesting was that it then created this space where organizations were doing pretty much anything to
Hmm.
attract talent, and to try and keep people, in their organizations as well. And so I think, there was kind of this trend around like perks outweighing the reality of the job. I remember at one point literally giving a sign-on bonus of a BMW for
Oh
somebody.
my gosh.
Like it was like
Sign me
engineer
up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. I literally was like, I should be an engineer at that point in my career. Because it was just so hard to fill roles. And then you also had, a lot of these campuses in the valley that were, you know, building their entire like construct around tennis pools and like food courts and just like crazy things. It became more about a place to live because we wanted people to kind of eat, sleep, and breathe on campus. And also we're trying to, give people these perks. And then the bubble burst, and all of a sudden you had all these unsustainable practices, and unrealistic norms that people couldn't afford anymore. And
Mhm.
so a lot of people had to scale back from that. And I remember living through that, like it was very painful. And I think it was, for me, probably one of the biggest kind of trend cycles that shaped how I think about trends, and how I think about how organizations could and should respond to them. Because the walk back and the scale back on that was really
Mhm.
painful. And so I think everyone kind of got caught up in it. And even smaller companies were trying to figure out how to tap into some of those same things that you can't compete with like Yahoo back in the day, but like how can you do something comparable? Um, and obviously, like, I think that there's a lot of value in having a well-rounded, benefit offering and making sure that you are mindful of perks that are meaningful for you. But I think if you're just trying to like keep up with the Joneses, like that's where it gets problematic. Like when you're just doing the things because everyone else is doing them and everyone starts like trumping on top of each other, we end up creating kind of together in a lot of ways, but some of these orgs individually create really unsustainable practices. And so, yeah, I think like when I think about the question top line, like that's probably one of the biggest examples for me of like seeing something all the way through to a couple people started to do it, everyone started to do it, and then everyone was like, "Oh snap," and started to
No
scale
one can
back.
do this anymore, right?
Right, right,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah, I too lived through that series, and you'd make a job offer and you'd have to be like, and here's the list of
All the
things and
reasons.
that we may not be able to do in 6 months. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a rough one. And I think, part of it for me as I was making offers and still am, is how does it connect to the core of who the company is?
yes,
Because I feel like a lot of these trends can be great ways to show who you are. Some of them can be not great ways to show who you are. So how do
yeah,
you think about, trends in company culture and making sure that you're staying aligned there in
yeah.
terms of who at core the company is and wants to be ongoing?
Yeah, thank you for that because I think that really is the heart of it, right? Like that is how you separate out kind of, from the scattergram of all the possible options, the things that are worth pursuing. And I'm a huge Simon Sinek fan, and so like in a lot of ways it starts with why, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think that when you have a really clear why around who you are as an organization and what that means for your people practices, and when that is grounded in something more substantial than everyone else is doing it, or
Mhm.
you have a leader who walks in your door and is like, "Hey, I just read this really cool HBR article, and so is doing this thing. Like, let's go
Yeah.
do it." Like, that's not necessary. That doesn't sound like it's grounded in our why, right? Maybe it is, and you can pressure test that one. Um, but I do think it's really about being aligned with those organizational values and making sure that you're making identity driven decisions versus trend based decisions. So you're using your identity and you're using, kind of who you want to be in the world and your culture as the filter for looking at those trends. And then when you do that, you're able to pull the things in that are aligned with who you want to be as an organization and are the things that really help you glean in the trends that will become true best practices for your organization, right? So it's like if you're trying to be X type of culture, then what are the A, B, and C options that are going to help you actually materialize that.
Mhm.
versus just going to the trends themselves without thinking about the impact that's going to have on your culture. Like, so culture really needs to be that leader or the lens by which you filter the trends, I think, in order to stay grounded in having a clear why. Did that
Yeah.
make sense?
No, it does. It
Okay.
does make sense. One of the things that it started making me think of was, obviously a lot harder to do if you haven't done the work to identify what your
Oh my
why
gosh.
is, what
Yeah.
your core is, what your culture is. It's like you just start chasing these shiny things and you have nothing to come back to. And it's just such I know it's a little bit of a tangent, but it just made me think about how
Yeah,
important that core work is to do and to do
totally.
continually as a company rather than just kind of letting it, fade away
Yeah.
as you grow.
Yeah.
Um, I was at Bamboo HR and Bamboo does a really good job of this, like who they are, what their culture is, and bringing it up regularly, and then was able to make decisions about what trends to follow and not follow based on that. So
Yeah.
they definitely that's something that they win at for sure. It also can be hard whether it's an employee, depending on if it's an employer or an employee market. I mean, the bubble that we talked about in the 2000s
Yeah.
was real. The Great Resignation was real. You know,
Right.
all of these trends were all of a sudden kind of the power shifts and it shifts to
Yes.
employees. And then it seems like instantly and just in a day, it shifts back and, kind of goes back
Yeah.
and forth. How do you maintain that core, that culture, and how is it different when it's an employee versus an employer market?
Yeah. I mean, I think you know, the hope would be that you really, to your point earlier, right? Like you're really grounded in your why, and that kind of becomes your rudder, if you will, so that whether the wind is blowing like one way or the other, like you can stay on course. I think the shallower, I love analogies. Like I'm making this one up as I go, but like the smaller your rudder is, the more likely you are to be like blown around, like based
Yep.
off of the way the wind is. Like the deeper it is, the more robust it is, the more like true it is to who you are, the more likely it is to actually like keep you on course. And you
Mhm.
can leverage those wins to get you where you want to go, but you're not like tossed around by them. Um, to your specific question on the employer employee piece, I think that's a huge part of it. And frankly, it's a lot of what a lot of us are experiencing like right now. And in my career, especially in the last 5 years, like I've never experienced this sort of rapid pace with which things are
Just
shifting. Yeah, it's been
yeah.
it's been kind of insane. Um, yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, right? It's like basic supply and demand. Like in a perfect world, you have the same number of, people as like open jobs. And so there's this like lovely match, but we don't live in a perfect world. And so there is this shift of power. And, when it's like 2000, where it's crazy, you've got so many more roles than you have people, then employers, I think, are tempted to kind of act outside of their core values and kind of forget their why, and just do whatever the heck they have to do to get like people in roles. And so I think, you kind of you put on clothes that aren't yours, and you like pretend you're something you're not. Like there's I think it's like a Verizon commercial, but there's guys like pretends he's French, and he's like, oui, like, it's like you like you pretend you're something you're not to like attract somebody to you. Like I went to SPU for college, and the male female ratio there was like way off, right? So there were a lot more women than there were men, and I think sometimes like people presented as like who they weren't because of the supply demand problem. So,
Yeah, it's a
you
human
know,
it's a human
it's a
reaction
human
to a
problem.
supply
It's
demand.
not
Yeah.
totally. Companies are made up of people, and so these things play out. And so I do think it is this sense of just being really tempted to pretend you're something you're not in order to get the result. And the result is you want people, and so you pretend that you're, you know, going to be more attractive to those folks. And potentially, you put policies in place, or you begin to talk openly about something you care about when perhaps at your core, that's not actually, who you really are. I
Mhm.
think on the flip side of that, if you end up in a world where there's just a lot more roles than there are people, um, companies can kind of lose their soul sometimes. And so you can almost start to forget that you are you are about your people and you need to be ensuring that you're attracting people and you need to be aware of what is also going on kind of in the market holistically and remain relevant. And so I think there also is this, attraction to doing what maybe a single person or a handful of people are really interested in doing versus like what should we be doing.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's a shorter rudder and it's losing your why when it's about either, what employees and like kind of a larger kind of universal trend might be, or about, people in power or what the company, might want to get out of folks. And so the more you make it about the who we want to be in the world, regardless of what is happening in the world, the more likely you are to really, again, kind of have that strong like sense of self and be able to weather the winds one way or the other.
It's really true as humans too, but it also is, leadership teams and
Yeah.
people departments and that I wonder, you talked a little bit about, someone says, "Oh, I just read this, Harvard Business Review article," and you want to go back to your why. How do you walk teams through that and so that they can understand how it relates to the why, but also like what's a trend that's going to come and go and a
Hmm.
trend that's going to become that best practice? Like,
Yeah.
what's the process there that you guide teams through?
I mean, I think, in a lot of ways, I think people who are in HR people practices, one of the most important skills that we need to develop is like how to ask a what I refer to as a generative question, which is like a question that helps people create something new or think about the future. Um, Asking good questions and helping people get there on their own is really what I think separates out people who are good in this space from those who maybe struggle more at it. And so I do think it would be the same concept of like, what sort of questions are you asking those leaders? What are you asking that leadership team? How do you help people think through where we're going? And so, I think there's the question of like, hey, does this feel like us? Like, kind of starting with a place of, we are saying that we stand for these things. And again, to our earlier conversation, the more that is truly ingrained in who you are, the easier it is to then have these conversations. Like, hey,
Sure.
our
Yeah.
values are X, Y, and Z. Like, hey, we have stated to employees that we care about these things. The more you have those, the more you can say, okay, this is who we are. Does this trend feel like it aligns with us and who we are? Is it accretive to what we're saying, we want to be in the world? Will it actually make us better? Does it align with our EVP or employer value proposition? To your point, if you don't have one, now's a good time to go do that work before it's like the shopping list before you're hungry, right? Like you build your EVP and then you actually walk in the grocery store and you buy like the right stuff.
Especially at
Um,
Trader Joe's. I'm just saying this time of
I
year.
know. Oh my
Dangerous.
gosh. Every time
Dangerous.
I'm like, I didn't need that, but now I
Yeah.
have it and it's really good. They're gummies, by the way. Okay. So good. So yeah, I mean, and again, like I think that a part of our job is to be business people whose area of expertise are people. And if you think about it with that lens, right? If I was a product person, right? Amy knows this.
Mhm.
If you're talking about your product, you want to expand in a way that feels adjacent to who you already are and where you're established in the market, right? Like you don't want to go off like we do, we do AI informed legal tech. We're not going to go and like open a pizza store. Like that is like nowhere near the work that we do today, right? Like we could expand into other parts of private equity, solve other problems. We could, expand into other industries. Like maybe we shift away from, or we add, private markets, and then we also do real estate. Like, but you want to kind of always keep what I refer to as like a pivot foot. Like you need to stay close enough to the world that you're already in as you think about what
Mhm.
those adjacencies are. And so, like, if you're playing basketball and you think about like the pivot foot concept, right? It's like, okay, can I keep one foot pivoted where I am today in the things that we are grounded in today and pivot and pick up this trend? or is it too far away, right? Like if it's too
Yeah.
far away, if the stretch is too far, they're like, maybe let it go. But if it's within your reach, but you're doing a little bit of a pivot, then like, cool, maybe you're expanding and there's opportunity for you to stay fresh and consider something new. So I do think it is just that sense of, how does it already feel like us? Is it close to who we are? Or if it's not, is it an adjacency that feels like it makes sense? Is it reachable? Or is it just like this crazy far-fetched program or policy or, idea that would make us look a little schizophrenic? And to your point, if you don't have those, if you don't have like an EVP, or if you don't have core values, if you don't have those things that ground you, like start with that, like start building that, because that's the piece that then helps like, how far into the trend ecosystem you may want to go.
That can be kind of that North Star, or whatever
Yeah.
a touch point is. I have been in enough discussions like this, and I know you have too, and the people that are listening, to know that you can have a why. Maybe it's really developed, maybe it's a little bit developed. You can have an opinion on what the trends are. You can have a good filter. You can do all these good things. You can speak up for the people team and for next steps, and you still can have someone with influence, whether it's a CEO or somebody else, who says, I really love what I read in this article,
Yeah.
or my brothers, my sisters, my moms, my whatever company is doing X and we've got to do it. So let's talk a little bit about the risks. Like, what are the risks when you do that? And then maybe as a follow-up, how do you kind of put bumpers on those risks best you can, when you may decide to take the leap and jump on a trend?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest risk is um probably like brand reputation, and then also potentially turnover, right? And those are potentially pretty expensive risks. So, in particular, if you have the ability to kind of get in front of it, making sure again you're asking some of those questions like, hey, are we willing to take this risk? Like, here's what I see as a potential challenge that could play out. We often are in roles of providing counsel, but we don't necessarily make choice. Um, and so I'm often, saying things to the nature of like, okay, so if we were to do this, like, let's think through. So we're
Yeah,
making eyes wide open decisions. Like, I am not going to tell you we can or can't do, but we do need to, if we're going to do it, we should do it with a lot of clarity on, what are the pros and what are the cons? And to your point, like, what are those risks? And I think presenting as something you're not, is a pretty big risk, in particular in today's, and you know this better than most on the marketing side, right? Like, we don't live in a world where you have complete control over your identity. Like, uh, brand perception is built in a lot of ways by what other people say about you. And as employers, our employment brand is built by things like Glassdoor and Blind and whoever knows what the next one is that I'm probably going to dislike just as much as I don't like those. Um, right? But like those are places where people can say whatever they want. And if they feel like you have presented as one thing and then you follow through with something different, people will share about it. It's just like, if I was a restaurant that said I was, the best teriyaki place in all of Seattle, and you're not, right? Like, people are gonna put that on Yelp. Like, people are gonna put that out there, and you're gonna end up with a lot of 0 stars. Um, and so I think it is that sense. If you said like, hey, I'm kind of super mediocre, and people were like, yeah, you were kind of mediocre. Like, cool, I'm still gonna go back because it was cheap and it was convenient and like I still wanted to be
right.
there. Right.
Yeah,
But if you
yeah.
say like I'm the best ever and then you're not, like, you're gonna get destroyed. And so I do think it is that sense of like, again, like, just, what do you want your brand in the world to be? And how do you make sure that you don't come across as being something you're not, because people will call you out. Um, I think there's also a lot of risk in kind of that concept of being rudderless. Like, if you're blown around, people may join you for the wrong reasons because they think that you align with their values, and you actually don't. And in a market like the current one, I think people are similar to kind of companies sometimes maybe putting on, um, you know, wanting to be something they're not. Sometimes employees do that too. Like, I just want a job. And so, they may pretend that they're
Mhm.
something they're not too. And so you think you have this lovely aligned employer-employee relationship, and then the market shifts and people have a lot more options. You know, Folks may
Mhm.
leave because they are disapproving of the choices that you've made as an organization. Or you may end up with people that are, within your midst that don't align because they, were unclear. So yeah, I think that there's a huge kind of engagement and potential turnover cost. Um, you also have the risk of people, joining because they think you're going to be what they're looking for. And then, they quit and stay, which like, I think is actually a lot worse than people who just leave.
Yeah.
Because the productivity from those folks is generally not rad. Um, and so again, I think it just kind of all goes back to having the chutzpah, if you will, to like be real with yourself and to be
Mhm.
clear. And not everyone has to like it. And you don't have to be a place that everybody wants to be at. But if you're real with who you are and you can deliver on that consistently, regardless of what's going on in the market, then people are going to be, at the organization for all the right reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. And you'll have the right people attracted,
Totally.
right?
Totally. Yep.
Yeah. I just think that's so true. It's so easy. And as you look at, you mentioned HR, like it's literally part of your job. And I would say it's part of my job too in marketing. Like you got to know what the trends are. You got to know what trends are going to stick, or at least have a good
Yeah.
spidey sense about that.
Yeah.
I had a lot of Spider-Man, by the way, at my door Halloween. Like
Oh, I love
Spider-Man was
that.
a big thing in my neighborhood.
Was
Yeah.
it? We get zero trick-or-treaters, so I like don't
Yeah,
get any of those
we
trends.
went crazy, and we had a lot of trick-or-treaters and a lot of little Spider-Men, spider people. We had spider
There you
people.
go.
Um, but you might have this sense that something's going to stick and it works with your why,
Mm,
but you also have programs and things that are core, right? That you need to
hmm
keep moving. How do you make that balance? Like, yeah, part of my job is to be an innovator, but part of my job is also to keep things steady and to keep things, make sure we're doubling down on things that work. How do you kind of balance that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, I mean, I don't know if there's a like single right way to do it. The way I think about it is, you kind of have to identify what are your table stakes? Like what is that core that has to stay healthy? And then, when is it appropriate and where is it appropriate to try new stuff on? I'm a big fan of like piloting things.
Hmm.
Um, I'm a big fan of listening strategies and being really thoughtful, like not just what are the trends that I'm seeing and kind of hearing about externally, but also like what are we hearing from our people? Like what are the things that they would like us to be trying on, if you will? Um, I think again, another analogy, like I think about it similar to like, you going shopping. Like you can put a bunch of stuff in your basket. You don't have to buy it all, but you're going to want to like try it on and see how it fits. And some stuff you may love and some stuff may, really fit you well. And some stuff may be a little bit like outside of your comfort zone. Other stuff you're like, no, that's so not me. Like I tried it on, but like I'm not taking it home. I think pilots are a lot like that. Like they give you the opportunity to try stuff on. Um, and so I do think that like, you have more opportunity to be innovative and to cycle through if you don't marry yourself to some of those things, but actually give yourself the ability to cycle through in more of a like pilot type of methodology. Trying things on in bite sizes. Maybe you do it within one business unit, or, maybe you do something for a period of time and you can be really clear with the business, like, hey, we want to see how this works for us, or if this fits into our larger kind of ecosystem of people practices. Obviously, some things you can't pilot, but where you can, I do think that that's an interesting way to try and both be innovative, like try on some of these trends, but also kind of continue to have the energy that is appropriate on your core. You certainly don't want to neglect the core and go
Um,
chasing after trends.
yeah, I love the idea of a pilot. We certainly do that in marketing as well. I think um, it's a really good way to go. I have seen people just say it's a pilot as a way of like
Yeah.
spinning something up really fast. So do you have parameters and kind of how you look at like what makes a good pilot? Like, how do you do this well versus just being like, here's 6 pilots,
Yeah.
and something lands.
I mean, I don't think you can call something a pilot after it's failed, like, and you're just trying to like take it
Yeah,
out.
yeah. That was just a pilot, just a
All
pilot.
right, don't worry. Yeah, exactly. We were just giving that a whirl. Um, I mean, I think you need to, do all of the same kind of front end work. Go slow to go fast, if you will, on assessing if something might be a fit. So to our earlier conversation, like, is it an adjacency? Does it align with, who you already are today? Is it when do you want to harness? Because it will help you move forward faster. So kind of getting a sense of like filtering it versus just doing the things because someone thought it was a good idea is really important. And then I do think where you can, being really clear that something is a test, because in particular in the people space, I think even if you call it a pilot, even if you intend for it to be a pilot, even if every intention is for,
Mhm.
you to possibly not continue with said practice or, idea, people will forget that. And
Yeah.
so like being really clear and consistent with the messaging of like, hey, we're piloting this thing because we were trying to understand if it has this, result. Reinforcing that it's a pilot, reinforcing that it's a test with feedback loops, like asking people like, hey, as a reminder, we're piloting this, like, how are you feeling about this pilot of the thing that we're doing? Like, so that we know if we want to continue it or not, can you give us some feedback on the thing? Like the more you just reinforce for people that, we're trying to understand and learn. And so the focus wasn't just to launch. The
Mhm.
focus was to get feedback. I think that helps people reinforce the fact that it is a pilot. It also takes energy. So it means you're not going to be doing 18 things at once because it takes energy to actually be getting the feedback and reviewing and, tweaking and making something, more appropriate for the organization. So I do think it becomes a natural sort of governor on not, kind of over piloting things. So
Yeah.
ensuring you have like actual practices that you're investing in it and that you're doing that. Um, and then also just being really clear, like if something is a one-way door, it's not a pilot. So don't call it one. Like
Mhm.
don't put things out there. It's like the never cry wolf, right? Like
Yeah.
or like don't if you call something a pilot that's clearly not, then you're losing your credibility when you actually pilot things.
Yeah.
So if something is just a change and it's a change, just own it and walk through the change management as such. Like don't pretend that it's a pilot because you think that's going to soften your blow because it actually will minimize your credibility when you want to go pilot something later.
Yeah, yeah. And pulling back is so hard. And so I think what you said about making sure you're just acknowledged this is a pilot. We'd like your feedback on the pilot.
Right.
This is how we'll know if it's successful. This is how we will
Totally.
all those things. Just makes me think of when obviously we all went remote for important reasons, but then as companies started saying, well, we're going to stay remote or you're going to be able to work from home, and then started maybe pulling some of that back as they decided it wasn't what they wanted for other reasons. The pushback kind of from the employee population
Right.
with companies where they felt like they hadn't been transparent about that. I think is just a great example of, if you're not
Totally.
planning to do that forever, you have to be really, really clear.
Yeah. And I do think there is space and we should be fair. Like there are times when you think you're going to do a thing and then you learn
Yeah,
something new and you
yeah,
pivot, right?
yeah,
But a pivot is not the same as a pilot. And
yeah.
so I do think it is that sense of like being clear on what is actually going on. And I think, return to office is a huge one. And then we're all, talking about that right now. Have been talking about it for years. Um, but yeah, like if you know you have a leader who really just wants people in the office. Like you have a lease and you're paying money for that lease and you want to see people, in those desks that are sitting there and like that that's what's going on. Like don't call it a pilot. Just tell people like this is the new norm. And
Yep.
I'm not saying this is going to be our forever norm and we might continue to learn and iterate on it, but it's going to be our new norm and just own it and like let people then choose how they want to engage with that. I think
Mhm.
with pilots there's always this bit of uncertainty and there's it's like when I tell my kids maybe right like which I
Mhm.
actually have tried really hard to do a lot less of like just be definitive like yes or no because I used to say maybe a lot and my daughter literally at one point was like I said maybe and she was like so no And I was like, no, what do you mean? I said maybe. And she's like, yeah, but every time you say maybe, you actually mean no. And I was like, oh,
Oh, yeah.
oh,
Mom brand, mom
okay.
brand.
Okay, we're getting real here. And so, and like that
Yep.
shook me. And so
Yep.
this was years ago. And so I've tried really hard to use a lot less maybes and to just be more definitive. Like, can I make the decision right now? Like, yep, we're going to do that. Or like, no, we're not going to do that. And like, that's not the answer you want, but I'm not going to give you a maybe to make it easier. I'm just going to tell you no. And
Right.
then we're going to move
Right.
on.
Yeah.
Because then when I do say maybe, you actually know I'm thinking about it.
Mm.
Um, versus it just being another way of saying no, right? So I think organizations need to do some of that too. Like just be willing to say no or be willing to say yes. Like and to live into that because that's what your decision actually is. And leverage the pilot in the maybe. Like when you're really truly not sure. You want to try something out and you want to see if it's going to work or not.
Yeah, I think that's great. I love my husband says in a minute. That's his maybe.
Ah,
And I think we all just want to know. So I've actually been teasing him lately about in a minute.
yes.
Hopefully he won't see this. No, I'm talking
Yeah.
about it, but I started saying in a minute back. I found that it works.
I love that
Um,
so much.
so as you know, we talked a lot about the core values and how hard it is in a conversation in a group, especially with passion around trends, to kind of make sure everyone gets aligned. How do you
Hmm.
think about making sure that your leadership team is aligned on those values? You talked about an EVP, but I'd love to just hear about
Yeah.
how do you go through that process? If someone needs to do that, what would you recommend?
I mean, there's actually a really good culture renovation, by the way, if you need to do something, there's a really great book Kevin Oakes wrote, who's the CEO of I4CP. It's an organization that I have been a part of for a long time. Like they actually do a really great kind of step process. Like, hey, if you're trying to kind of identify what your culture is and build some stuff out there, like it's a great kind of step-by-step book on how to do that. Um, I think more often than not, our companies have a culture and companies have some nuances of it. So it's usually around like discovery of like who are we and is it aligned with who we want to be? And I think what gets really interesting is that you also have, at its core, your CEO really is the kind of captain of your culture. I'm not like my job is to steward it, but I'm not the one who gets to really decide what it is. That
Mhm.
comes, really from the top more so than anybody else. Um, and as we all know, right, like CEO changeovers happen way more frequently these days than they did, in decades past. And so I think on some level, we just need to maybe get into a pattern of more regularly kind of assessing and validating, like, hey, who are we saying we are, and is that still true? Has the market changed around us? Has our industry changed? Has our core business changed? Has our leadership changed? Like, if any of those things have significantly shifted, like that's a great time to just
Mhm.
validate who are we and who are we saying we want to be in this world because it's supposed to be anchored in your vision and your mission and those are generally very tied with industry market leadership, right? So as you kind of take stock of what is going on, I think anytime there's been a shift, it's a good opportunity to just pull some of your key leaders together and validate, here's what we're saying our EVP is, here's our values, like let's just be really real with ourselves, like are they real? And there's a couple, I would say personally, like pressure tests on that. Like if you would not actually fire somebody for violating those values, they're probably not actually your values, right? If you
Mhm.
say these are things we value but then you actually tolerate the opposite, that's probably not actually your value. We actually just wrapped up a huge body of work here at Entra where we redid our value set and we used our current as kind of our foundation. And I use the analogy when I shared it out with employees a couple, actually it was like 3 weeks ago, of a Pokemon evolving, right? Because my kids were into that at one point in time. And so I do think it is like we basically took our values and we kind of like evolved them into this new superset, if you will. But that was based off the fact that our org is totally different from where it was 10 years ago when they were originally created, right? We are now global. We're in, multiple different industries. We have an entire new leadership team. We've totally shifted our strategy. Like everything has changed. And so how could those same things be all that is still important to us? And so we did a lot of like housekeeping and just reviewing like, okay, would we actually, would these things, if all of our employees, presented with these behaviors, would we be achieving our strategy and would we be showing up in the world the way we want to? And a part of that work was we came up with kind of contra indicators. So for each of them, we said, okay, this is what it is, but PS, this is also what it's very much not. And
Mhm.
we'll fire people for those things. Like that stuff, like the what it's not, like that is
Yeah,
real, right? And so I
makes
do
it
think
really real.
it makes it really real. And so I do think it is that sense of like not just agreeing on who you want to be, but also being real with yourself. Like, will we make hard choices? Like, what is the flip side of that? And will we actually make the hard choices? And if your leadership doesn't feel like they can do that, then I would challenge you to redo the work because that's probably not, who you actually want to be in the world.
You haven't landed there yet.
You
Yeah.
haven't landed there yet. Yeah.
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 Yeah. That makes sense. This has been such a fun conversation. I wish we could do it for the full day, but we don't have the full day. People have to get back as do you. But as we end, I'd love to just to hear kind of as attendees and people listening to this are thinking, I'm getting some pressure. Um, I've got to think about all these things. I got to think about trends and become best practices, and I've got to figure out what our core is and all these things. Like, what's kind of the number one piece of advice you'd give to them as these things start to come in terms of how to think this through?
I mean, I'd probably start off by saying like, hey, welcome to your job. Like this is the
Yeah,
joy of people work, right? I
yeah,
mean, it's not easy. It's not cut and dry. There's no guidebook. Um, I think it's also really important to be aware of, where's the pressure coming from and being mindful about how you respond based off of that. Like it's very different when it's your CEO's perspective on a thing versus, folks on the edges. One of the things that I love to do is join companies that are, growing really rapidly and the edges and those voices get louder as your en masse employee population gets bigger just by nature of numbers. But it can feel like there's more people that are feeling kind of, on particular extremes. When in reality, if you kind of think about the percentage, it's probably not. It just gets louder.
mhm,
And so some of it is like, how do you check yourself and not be swayed too much by any singular voice or any group? And then I think the other piece that I would say is really important is how do you learn from the trend? So even if you're not going to do it, is there something you can learn from it? And that can become a
mm,
really interesting way to also maybe ensure that you're staying connected with folks that are kind of in those extreme perspectives or where that pressure is kind of coming from or whoever your kind of trend leader is. Like, okay, like what's underneath that for you? Like, what is the thing that you are really interested in achieving by doing that? And like, what are maybe we already doing that's helping that? I just need to educate you more on that. Or, what are different things that we might be able to do that are, maybe again, kind of using that pivot analogy from earlier that are within reach, because that thing feels really not. But this, like, maybe we can think about something that's closer in. Or what can we just learn? Like, man, if that really is a trend, let's keep an eye on that one because that's going to change the way the world works. And that's going to change the way people that, we want to bring into the organization a decade from now are, thinking about the employer relationship. And
I love
so
that.
while we
Yeah.
may not want to make a change or we may not do anything right now, like we should still be aware of the fact that we are in this global
Mhm.
economy. It's not just we're not independent organizations that don't impact each other with our choices. So I think it's always good to be aware. It's really good to just, continue to network, join stuff like this, like learn, stay connected with others and then also just, again, kind of use those filters that we talked about earlier.
I appreciate that. I think it's, it's such good advice for all of us that deal with trends. And I think that's true of most departments. I mean, I don't, I know certainly in marketing, there's always pressure that like, look at this new Instagram way to do this XYZ thing. And sometimes those
Right.
can be great and sometimes they can just be a distraction.
Yes, totally. Yes.
So good for all of us to think about the constructs that we process this through. We don't have a lot of time, but we have a little bit of time for questions. If people have those, I was noticing, go ahead and put those in the chat. I was noticing we've got people from all over the place, which is super fun. And enough Californians that I know it's sunny and warm some places that are watching, which makes me happy. So, I can feel warmth through the Zoom. But yeah, go ahead and throw questions in there if you've got them, and we'll get those answered. If we don't have any questions, I do want to make sure we're sharing um, the the chapters that we've been doing in terms of missing chapters. These are the last 3 that we did. And we talked about with North Face about dispersed and retail workforces. We talked about AI and how that can change the job of HR, with Kat Judd from Lucid. And then Kate and I had a great conversation. She's at WE, on generational stereotypes. And I've learned so much
Mm,
in this conversation with you, Megan, but also in all of these conversations. So I just encourage folks to go check those out on demand. And sometimes we pop them up in our socials as well. I'd also encourage everyone here to join the community. NAVA has a great community. Join us. You do have to do a quick apply, but it's in the chat. And you'll join our Slack. We've got special events, both virtual and in person. And just really try to have this be an enablement of HR conversations, versus anything particularly about NAVA, just an enabler of those important conversations. So with that, I'll just say, Megan, thank you so much. This has been really fun. And thanks so much for joining us, and everyone who attended or is watching on demand. We look forward to hearing feedback on how you're managing trends and your next steps forward. Thanks so much, everyone.